What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So, audiophile myths and misconceptions. We've got a few of them in this hobby, and it's time we dispel them. So, let's just jump into it. The first myth I've heard people say is that a good system should be accurate and reproduce the music the way the artist intended. I disagree for two reasons. One, I don't think the artist's intention is to micromanage the way you enjoy your sound system. I think their intention is just to make money. Two, there's no accounting for personal taste. Some people like their mid-range to be so thick, luscious, juicy, and warm that it sounds like you're inside an acoustic guitar. That's not accurate, but if that's what you like, there's nothing wrong with that. I believe the right sound is the sound that puts a smile on your face. So, next, people who believe that a certain component is the most important thing in the audio chain, whether it be a DAC, an amp, your streamer, whether you do digital or vinyl. I just don't believe that. Every now and then I get this question where people are like, I got $1,000, what do you think I should upgrade next? Like, what's the most important thing, Nemo? And it's a hard question for me to answer because I don't believe it works that way. I believe it's the whole system and how the parts work together in harmony with the room and your ears and your music choice and all that good stuff. I would say if you've got money burning a hole in your pocket, try to be intelligent with the upgrade. For example, if your speakers are, $600 and your amp is $1,000 and you've got a decent streamer or source, but you're still using the internal DAC, then maybe upgrade your DAC. But if your DAC's already upgraded and everything's pretty good, but maybe you're using like an old AVR, maybe it's time you upgrade the AVR to a nice integrated amp or something like that. You know what I mean? Anyhow. Next myth or misconception I've got here, and this one's from the cable debates, and I don't care about the cable debates. It's just what is said here is incorrect, and I just want to clarify that. In cable debates, you'll see someone say something like, well, sound engineers and recording studios, they use cheap cables, so I use cheap cables. If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. It's just not true. I think sometimes what happens is when something is said originally, it's correct, but then it gets exaggerated over time and becomes incorrect. I believe the truth or the correct way of saying it is recording studios and sound engineers don't use $10,000, $20,000 esoteric cables. Yes, that is correct. But they also don't use the cheapest cables available. You will not find Amazon Basics cables in a professional recording studio. So I know this because I've been to recording studios. I also have friends that are sound engineers, and they're actually quite picky with the cables they use for, say, a microphone, for example, and are willing to spend quite a bit of money on a cable they believe is built better to a higher quality and will yield better performance. So again, this has nothing to do with the cable debate, simply this belief that sound engineers use cheap cables or recording studios use cheap cables. It's not true. So moving on, people who say bass is non-directional. This makes me crazy because it's not true. Bass is directional. The truth of it is bass is less directional. It's not as directional as, say, a tweeter, for example, but it's not non-directional. If that were the case, you could shove the subwoofer anywhere in the room and it would sound fantastic, and we all know that's not the case. And if you don't believe me and you have a subwoofer, it's really easy to test. If you've got just one subwoofer, take that one subwoofer and just put it on the other side of the room. Play a song and you will totally notice it sounds wildly different. The bass is clearly missing from the one side of the room where it used to be, and is clearly coming from the other side of the room where it is now. Now, what happens to most people is after that subwoofer being there in its new location for a period of time, your brain starts to get used to it. It starts to sound like it's omnidirectional. But again, move that subwoofer to the other side of the room and you will quickly notice bass is very directional, actually. Next, there's this belief that there's like only 3 metrics that really matter with a subwoofer. I see this on the forums that people believe that a subwoofer's SPL capability, frequency response, and frequency extension tell the whole story. They believe if you've got 2 subwoofers and they've got those same 3 specs, they should sound the same or something is wrong. And I disagree with that. I don't believe that to be the case. If that were true, designing a subwoofer would be so easy. You know, an idiot could do it. You would just be like, all right, let's shove a huge motor section in there just to be on the safe side. Let's make that driver super thick to make sure it doesn't flex and can handle the power we're throwing at it and doesn't deform under load. Let's make that voice coil, let's give it a ton of windings, for heat dissipation and power handling and stuff, who cares? And let's throw it all together in a cabinet and make sure it works. That's not going to sound the same as another engineer who goes, okay, let's make this driver as thick as it needs to be to not deform, but not overshoot it. Let's make the motor section as large as it needs to be. Let's make this voice coil as beefy as it needs to be and not overshoot the mark. Those two subwoofers are going to sound totally different, even if they have the same SPL spec, extension spec, and frequency response. So whether you agree or disagree, I guess I don't really care. It's a weird thing some people believe. Like, we don't believe that about speakers. You know what I mean? Like, if I've got a speaker that measures a certain way and a totally different speaker that measures very similarly, do you guys think they should sound the same? Like, I get that it's like, from a scientific standpoint, perhaps, like, well, why don't they? I don't know. Personally, what I believe is, I don't believe we've discovered all the ways there are to measure things, is kind of what it comes down to. I think our senses are way more complicated than we realize. And the major fallacy here of like this whole like, these specs, this measurement being so important is it fails to account for like, what if there's a metric that hasn't been discovered? You know what I mean? Like how do you measure, like what metric puts a smile on your face when you hear a good sound system? Which metric is that? You know what I mean? Which metric makes you feel that urge to sing along to a song or like tap your feet? Which metric is it that makes you feel relaxed or energetic when you listen to music? I don't think we've discovered all of them. So yeah, I don't believe that those three specs for a subwoofer is all you need to know. I consider that spec whoring, honestly, and I think it's a bad habit. Next. Ooh, this one grinds my gears to high hell. There's this belief that high-level inputs on a subwoofer is the superior connection method and that low-level inputs or line-level inputs are not as good. This is totally wrong and a huge misunderstanding. This is where it comes from. Rel uses high-level inputs on their subwoofers and they recommend you use that as the preferred connection method. And that is correct. You should do that. If you have a Rel T5X, T9X, S510, use their high-level input. It's going to sound a little bit better. It's not going to be night and day, but it is going to sound better. What most people don't realize is Rel's high-level circuit is specially designed and engineered to sound better. They use a fantastic high-level circuit. Every other subwoofer in the world does not. Every other subwoofer in the world, the high-level input is a legacy connection for people that have no choice. It is not ideal. It is not superior. It is not the preferred method. Let me say this very clearly. If you have a Rel subwoofer with high-level input, sure, use it. And if you can't, then use the line level. It'll sound great. It's still a Rel subwoofer, Any other subwoofer you have, Rhythmic, SVS, Klipsch, I don't care who makes it. If it's got both, use the line level. There's no reason to use high-level inputs unless you have something like a tube integrated amp that doesn't have line out or sub out. I don't know where this came from outside of the Rel confusion, because I think this is like a belief that's been held even prior to that. I know just it's become more popular with the Rel confusion. Trust me guys, I review more subwoofers than anyone. High-level connection is a legacy connection except for Rel. Now, if you still don't believe me and you're like, nope, I think high-level is the best way to go, okay, do it. I don't care. And if you have a subwoofer that doesn't have high-level and you want to add it, you can buy a high-to-low converter off Amazon for $12 because that's how cheap a cheap high-to-low converter is, and that's pretty much what's in every subwoofer except Rel. So have at it. Next. Small subs are faster or tighter than bigger subs. So this is again a confusion that's been like mixed up. The correct way to say it is a subwoofer with lightweight moving mast may sound tighter or faster and so on, right? And there's this belief that a smaller sub is a lighter sub. That's not always the case. It is sometimes, but sometimes it's the total opposites because a small subwoofer with like a lot of wattage going to it still needs to have a very thick driver with a thick surround and a beefy voice coil to handle all of that power that's going to it. So there could be 8-inch subwoofers that weigh, or not weigh, but sorry, have the same moving mass weight of a 12-inch subwoofer. So that's going to be negated. And then what's worse is that little subwoofer has to move like hell to produce the same amount of bass. That 12-inch subwoofer only has to move a few millimeters. So there are times when a smaller subwoofer can sound cleaner, can sound more musical, sure. But I don't believe in absolutes. I don't believe a smaller sub is always the tighter, cleaner, faster. It's just not true. I have a 15-inch subwoofer here, guys. It's one of the tightest subwoofers I've ever heard. You know what I'm saying? So it's excursion is a big factor, you know, and because I mean, what do you think sounds better? An 8-inch moving at its X max, 3 inches peak to peak, or a 12-inch that's moving, you know, 5 millimeters to make the same amount of bass? You tell me. Next one, subwoofer wattage indicates how good or loud it can be. This is a big misconception. I don't believe there's any single spec that tells you the whole story of any particular component, because these components are entire systems, right? A subwoofer is a system. Wattage is just a single spec. And it does matter, but it's not the end-all be-all. Let me give you an example. The KEF KC62 has 1,000 watts RMS. The SVS SB1000 Pro has only 325 watts. 1/3 the wattage of the KEF KC62, but the SVS SB1000 Pro can play at least twice as loud as the 1,000 watt RMS KEF KC62 for a myriad of reasons. But the easiest way to say it is, overall, the SB1000 Pro is a more efficient system from top to bottom. It's a larger driver. What do you expect? Anyhow. Next one is absolutes. I don't believe in absolutes. And I'll give you an example of absolute advice someone might give is, someone might say something like, subwoofer isolation, huge improvement, you gotta do it. Or power conditioning, huge improvement, you gotta do it. That might be true for them. It doesn't mean it's gonna be true for you. And that's generally the case with a lot of things, especially tweaks, and here's why. My home is on a concrete slab. Do you think I need subwoofer isolation as much as someone that is maybe on the second floor of an apartment? Probably not. I probably won't benefit the same way someone that's on a like suspended floor would. And it's same with power conditioning. If I'm in a home that was built in 1960, I'd probably benefit from power conditioning more than someone who's in a home that was built in, say, 2015. So be careful when people give advice in absolutes without context and don't ask you questions. These things all matter. The last one is measurements, but I think I already touched on that. You know, I think measurements are important for the engineer who designs the driver or designs the amplifier or whatever the hell the component is. I don't think we should use measurements to make a buying decision. I don't think they're so important to the end consumer. I've seen products that measure great but don't sound all that great, and I've also seen the opposite happens where on paper the product doesn't look all that good, but its real world performance is fantastic. And here's something some of you guys might not know. Manufacturers are smart. A lot of them know that consumers are starting to pay more attention to measurements. So there are manufacturers that are putting extra effort into making sure their product measures well. They're adding components to a product that previously didn't have this component simply so it measures better. There's ways to fudge those numbers, you know what I'm saying? And even sometimes, companies will modify a design to measure better at the expense of sound because they know there's a whole community of people that are measuring gear and no one wants to have their product show to measure poorly. So I don't love the measurements obsessed perspective. I think it's important. I think it helps the industry on one hand. There's this huge level of accountability, but I think it also harms the industry on another hand and leads to a lot of obsession, misunderstanding, spec whoring, and it's just not good. The last thing I want to talk about is, this is just something to keep in mind, is we're not all sensitive to the same thing with respect to our hearing. Some people might, for example, hate a subwoofer that has overhang, while someone else, it might not bother them too much at all. While a third person may not even know what overhang is or have the data points to hear it. We can say the same about mid-range or treble. One person might say, this speaker is kind of sibilant. I don't like that. Another person might say, no, it's a sharp sound, I like that. And a third person might say, I don't even hear any of that. So we're all gonna hear slightly differently. We all have different sensitivities to different parts of the audio spectrum. So I would say just keep that in mind. You know, you want to take things with a grain of salt. This is a hobby. It's supposed to be fun. So don't get too wound up in, you know, whether it be spec whoring or someone telling you the way you should mod your system or how you should listen to it and all that kind of crap. Just kick back, relax, and enjoy the damn music. You know what I mean? That's what I got into this for. Anyhow, I've talked about as much as I care to talk about for myths and misconceptions. If you have any questions, this channel does have a Discord now. I will leave links in the description below. Until next time, later.